Right now, at this very moment, two of the most powerful warships ever built are cutting through the Arabian Sea. Over 200 American warplanes have been repositioned around Iran. B-2 stealth bombers, the same planes that dropped bunker-buster bombs last June, are being tracked by military analysts watching their every move. And inside the White House Situation Room, top national security officials have already told Donald Trump, the military is ready. A strike could happen within days. But here is the part that should stop you cold. Sources say this attack will make last year's Operation Midnight Hammer look like, and I'm quoting Trump's own words here, peanuts. This is not a drill. This is not a threat. This is the most dangerous moment in the Middle East since the Iraq War, and we are going to break down every single detail for you right now. Welcome back to the channel. If you are watching this right now, you need to understand that what is happening in the Middle East at this moment is not normal. It is not routine military posturing. It is not diplomatic bluster. What the United States has assembled in and around the waters of Iran over the past several weeks is, by the assessment of former Pentagon officials, former U.S. ambassadors, and senior military analysts at the most respected think tanks in Washington, the most significant and dangerous buildup of American military power directed at a single country since the United States began its invasion of Iraq in 2003, and the intelligence being reported by CNN, The Washington Post, NPR, Al Jazeera, and the Irish Times is now unambiguous. President Donald Trump has been told that the military is ready. A strike on Iran could happen within days. And according to multiple sources with direct knowledge of White House deliberations, whatever comes next is going to be far larger, far more destructive, and far more consequential than anything America has done to Iran before. To understand why this moment is so significant, we need to go back, not too far, just 8 months, to June 22nd, 2025. That night, the United States military launched a covert, coordinated, and devastating assault on 3 of Iran's most protected nuclear facilities. The operation was called Operation Midnight Hammer, and it involved 4,000 American military personnel operating in near-perfect secrecy until the first bombs fell. The targets were Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, the crown jewels of Iran's nuclear program, and the weapons used were among the most powerful conventional bombs ever deployed. The Fordow facility, which had been built deep inside a mountain precisely to survive aerial bombardment, was struck with 12 massive ordnance penetrator bombs, each one weighing 13,000 kilograms, that is 28,700 pounds, and capable of penetrating 60 meters into reinforced concrete before detonating. These bombs were carried by 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, aircraft so advanced that they are virtually invisible to radar. The attack was carried out in conjunction with Israel during the final days of what would come to be known as the 12-day Iran-Israel War. Iran's nuclear program was severely damaged. Its air defenses were overwhelmed, and in the immediate aftermath, the world let out a collective breath, wondering if the crisis had been managed. It had not. 8 months later, the crisis is not only alive, it has escalated to a level that is genuinely alarming everyone who watches the region professionally, and the reason comes down to a simple but devastating reality. Iran has not stopped. Despite the bombing, despite the damage, despite the billions of dollars in destruction inflicted on its facilities, Iran has been rebuilding. Not slowly, not carefully, but with extraordinary speed and determination. Satellite imagery analyzed by the Institute for Science and International Security, a respected Washington-based organization, shows that as of February 10, 2026, just days before this broadcast, Iran is actively reinforcing the tunnel entrances at the underground complex near Natanz. Fresh concrete is visible at both the western and eastern entrances, designed to harden those tunnels against future bombing. Trucks and construction equipment are working day and night. At the Parchin military complex southeast of Tehran, Iran has completed what analysts are calling a concrete sarcophagus, a massive reinforced shell, around one of its key nuclear facilities, and is now covering that structure with soil to further shield it from aerial attack. At the 7th of Tir industrial complex near Isfahan, damaged structures linked to the production of centrifuge parts for uranium enrichment have been fully rebuilt, according to CNN's review of image analysis. Jeffrey Lewis, distinguished scholar of global security at Middlebury College, told CNN, Iran is reconstituting its nuclear and missile programs, and doing so faster than Israel claimed it could when it launched its own strikes during Operation Rising Lion. That reconstruction is the backdrop against which everything that follows must be understood. But there is a second part to this story that is just as important as what is happening underground in Iran. It is what is happening on and above the waters of the Arabian Sea and the Mediterranean right now. In the past 4 to 5 weeks, the United States military has conducted one of the most dramatic and rapid repositioning of military assets in modern American history. It started with the USS Abraham Lincoln, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that is 333 meters, over 1,000 feet, long and carries approximately 75 warplanes, with a crew of between 6,000 and 7,000 sailors and Marines. The Lincoln was sent to the Arabian Sea south of Iran following Trump's January 28th declaration on Truth Social that, and this is the president's own language, a massive armada is heading to Iran with great power, enthusiasm, and purpose. That was not hyperbole for the sake of social media. The Lincoln arrived, and it was just the beginning. On February 14th, Trump announced that the USS Gerald R. Ford, one of the most advanced aircraft carriers ever constructed, the flagship of Carrier Strike Group 12, was being dispatched to join the Abraham Lincoln. The Ford had just completed operations in the Caribbean as part of Operation Southern Spear, the campaign that ended with the January 3rd raid on Caracas and the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, who now sits in a New York courtroom facing guns and drugs charges. Now the Ford is heading toward Iran, and military analysts who monitor carrier movements say that once it takes position, the United States will have an unprecedented pincer formation, one carrier to the south of Iran in the Arabian Sea, and assets to the west in the Mediterranean. But aircraft carriers are only part of the picture. Flight tracking services, including the publicly available data from Flight Radar 24, have documented the repositioning of dozens of aircraft in just the past few days. According to the Irish Times, which conducted an extensive review of flight data, 39 airborne tankers have been repositioned to locations closer to the potential theater of action in just the past 3 days. A further 29 heavy-lift aircraft, cargo planes like the C-17 Globemaster III, have made runs to Europe during that period. 6 journeys to Europe this month began at Fort Hood, Texas, home to the 69th Air Defense Artillery Brigade, which operates both the Patriot and the THAAD missile defense systems. One C-17 delivery from Fort Hood went directly to Jordan. The significance of deploying Patriot and THAAD systems is not lost on military analysts. These are defensive systems designed to protect American forces and regional allies from Iranian ballistic missile retaliation. They are being put in place not because the United States fears starting a conflict, but because it is preparing for the consequences after one begins. The aircraft being repositioned are staggering in their capability. F-35 fifth-generation stealth strike fighters, F-22 Raptor air superiority jets, the most advanced fighters in the world, F-15 and F-16 multi-role fighters providing mass and flexibility, E-3 Sentry airborne warning and control system planes, the AWACS aircraft that serve as the eyes and ears of any air campaign, coordinating strike packages over hundreds of miles of airspace. And underneath it all, almost certainly, are American submarines. Nuclear-powered fast attack vessels that can launch cruise missiles from positions Iran cannot detect or track. The total number of American warplanes now in the Middle East is estimated by military analysts at well over 200. That is a number that has not been assembled in that region since Operation Iraqi Freedom. Mark Cancian, a retired Marine Corps colonel and senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, gave one of the most significant pieces of advice to anyone trying to read this situation accurately. He said, "Watch for B-2 movements. The B-2 Spirit stealth bomber is the only aircraft in the U.S. inventory capable of delivering the massive ordnance penetrator, the 13,000-kilogram bunker buster that can reach 60 meters underground. It is the weapon that destroyed Fordo. If B-2s begin moving," said Cancian, "that would indicate a possible replay of Operation Midnight Hammer. And the B-2s are already in the conversation." The buildup has been so explicitly designed around deep strike capabilities that Becca Wasser, a defense analyst, told the Irish Times something that should be quoted in full context. This buildup is so massive that it almost speaks to the fact that there needs to be strikes, or else this is going to be one of the costliest bluffs in U.S. history. The Caribbean buildup ahead of the Venezuela operation cost the United States nearly $3 billion from late August to early February. The Middle East buildup is already being compared to it in scale, and by some measures exceeds it. Now let us talk about what Trump actually wants. This is where the situation becomes not just militarily alarming, but diplomatically complex and strategically murky in ways that increase the risk of miscalculation. The president has said publicly that his preference is for a deal. Iran has said it also prefers a deal. On February 18th, Iranian and American negotiators held indirect talks in Geneva, meaning they did not sit at the same table but communicated through intermediaries for 3.5 hours. The talks ended without a clear resolution. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said the two sides agreed on a set of guiding principles and that further steps were needed. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said the Iranians had not acknowledged the red lines set by Trump. Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, briefed the president on the talks the following day. And the president has given Iran a window, 10 to 15 days at most, to agree to a deal. After that, he has warned, bad things will happen. What does Trump want in that deal? The demands are stark. First, and most critically, the United States is insisting on a permanent, complete halt to Iran's uranium enrichment program. Not a slowdown, not a cap, not inspections, a full stop. Iran has enriched uranium to 60% purity, dangerously close to the 90% needed for a nuclear weapon, and the United States wants that stopped permanently. Second, the U.S. is demanding that Iran accept restrictions on its ballistic missile program, the same missiles that Iran used to strike the Al Udeid air base in Qatar on June 23, 2025, the day after Operation Midnight Hammer, in what was widely described as a face-saving retaliatory gesture that caused no casualties. Third, the Trump administration wants Iran to cut off all financial and material support to its regional proxy groups, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. These are demands that, taken together, would fundamentally transform Iran's strategic posture and strip away the deterrent architecture it has built over 4 decades. Mehdi Mohammadi, a senior Iranian advisor, said bluntly on Iranian state television that Washington's demands translate into, disarm yourself so we can strike you when we want. That formulation captures why Iran is unlikely to accept the full package. But it also explains why Iran is at least engaged in talks. Because the alternative, a second larger military strike, carries existential risks for the current regime. Trump, meanwhile, has been deliberately and strategically ambiguous about his ultimate objective. On some days, he sounds like he would be satisfied with a nuclear deal. On other days, notably when he spoke at Fort Bragg on February 13th, he said that regime change would be the best thing that could happen to Iran. Secretary of State Marco Rubio acknowledged in testimony to lawmakers on January 28th that there was no simple answer to what would happen if Iran's government fell. No one knows who would take over, he said. The exiled opposition is fragmented, disconnected from domestic realities, and lacks the organizational capacity to govern a country of 90 million people. That admission by Rubio, a man who has been one of the most hawkish voices on Iran in the entire Trump administration, is remarkable. It suggests that even the architects of potential military action understand they do not have a clear endgame. Former U.S. Ambassador to Qatar Susan Ziadeh, now at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, made a point that deserves to be taken very seriously. She said, just the fact that you have so much firepower creates a momentum of its own, and sometimes that momentum is a little hard to just put the brakes on and say, that's it, we're not doing anything. That dynamic, the self-reinforcing logic of military buildup is one of the most dangerous aspects of the current crisis. When you have repositioned 2 carrier strike groups, over 200 aircraft, dozens of tankers, Patriot and THAAD batteries, and submarines at an estimated cost of billions of dollars, the political pressure to use that force, or to at least be seen to have gotten something for it, becomes immense. There has been media reporting, confirmed in outline if not in detail by multiple sources, that Trump may be considering a graduated escalation strategy, a limited initial strike followed by a pause, giving Iran a final opportunity to return to the negotiating table before a heavier onslaught follows. Trump was asked directly about this scenario on February 21st and responded, "I guess I can say I am considering it. That conditional, hedged answer is almost certainly intentional, part of a maximum pressure strategy designed to keep Iranian decision-makers off balance and uncertain about what comes next. The uncertainty itself is a weapon. But Iran has not been passive in the face of this pressure. Tehran has spent the months since Operation Midnight Hammer preparing for exactly this scenario. Satellite imagery tells a story of determined, systematic hardening. At the Qom missile base, a building that had roof damage from July 2025 has been fully repaired with a new roof, according to Reuters analysis published this week. At the Shiraz South Missile Base, repair and clearance work that began after attacks in July 2025 has been completed. Iran's Revolutionary Guards conducted naval exercises in the Strait of Hormuz this week, a pointed reminder that Iran has the capability to disrupt global oil shipping. Those exercises were followed by joint Iranian and Russian naval drills in Iran's southern waters, a demonstration of Moscow's continued, if limited, solidarity with Tehran. The Russian participation matters geopolitically. It signals that Iran is not entirely isolated and that any American military action will carry diplomatic consequences with Moscow. Iran has also made institutional changes that speak to its threat perception. Hamidreza Azizi, a visiting fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, told CNN that Iran's appointment of war veterans to national security structures signals that Tehran is preparing for the possibility of a U.S. decapitation strike, potentially targeting Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei himself. The question of succession has become suddenly and urgently relevant. Khamenei, who has ruled Iran since 1989, reportedly became increasingly hard to reach during the pressures of last June's conflict, with authority devolving to provincial governors in ways that revealed fragility in the command structure. Iran has been watching and learning. Azizi said the country is getting prepared for a post-Khamenei scenario, whether or not a decapitation strike actually occurs, simply because the scale of any potential U.S. campaign makes that outcome a real possibility that must be planned for. Iran's financial markets have already felt the pressure. The country's currency weakened nearly 1% in a single trading day this week, with the dollar rising toward 1,730,000 Iranian rials, according to Iran on NTL. That is a market pricing in war risk. The Iranian economy was already under severe strain from years of sanctions, high inflation, and currency depreciation before this crisis began. The nationwide anti-government protests that swept through Iran in early January 2026, sparked by executions and mass detentions, added a domestic dimension to the crisis. Trump cited those protests explicitly as a reason to consider military action, warning that if Iran executed more protesters, a U.S. strike would make Operation Midnight Hammer look like peanuts. The Iranian government cracked down on the protests, and Trump then claimed, in a claim disputed by Tehran, that his pressure had caused the executions to be halted. Barbara Slavin, Distinguished Fellow at the Stimson Center in Washington, summarized the assessment of the analytical community in stark terms. She told Al Jazeera, "It seems that the Trump administration has decided that it is going to attack Iran again, and I presume in conjunction with the Israelis. What the objectives are, we have yet to see. Can it be contained? Will others be drawn in? These are all really important questions, and we don't have answers." Those questions, the containment and escalation, are the ones that should most concern ordinary people watching this crisis unfold. Iran has spent decades building a multi-layered deterrent strategy designed precisely to make any American or Israeli strike as painful as possible. That strategy rests on 4 pillars. First, mines. Iran can cede the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of global oil trade passes, with mines that would disrupt shipping and spike global energy prices. Second, missiles. Iran's ballistic and cruise missile arsenal, while damaged by strikes last year, is being rebuilt. Even in its degraded state, it can reach American bases in Iraq, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain. Iran struck Qatar's Al Udeid base last June with ballistic missiles in retaliation for Operation Midnight Hammer. No casualties resulted, but the message was unmistakable. Third, submarines. Iran operates a fleet of small submarines in the Persian Gulf that can threaten shipping and naval vessels in confined, shallow waters where American carrier groups are at their most vulnerable. Fourth, drones. Iran produces and exports large numbers of Shahed series drones. The U.S. Navy already shot down a Shahed drone that approached the USS Abraham Lincoln earlier this month. A live combat incident that received almost no media attention but underscores how active this confrontation already is. Vali Nasser, professor of international affairs and Middle East studies at Johns Hopkins University, told a roundtable discussion hosted by CSIS this week that the Iranians have, over the past 6 months, quietly taken additional steps to move critical assets further underground. The message is direct. Whatever the United States was targeting in June 2025, some of those targets no longer exist at their previous locations, or they are now shielded behind additional layers of concrete and soil. A second American strike, even using the same massive ordnance penetrator bombs, may find different and more difficult targets than it did last time. This raises what is perhaps the most consequential analytical question of this entire crisis. What happens if a second American strike cannot finish the job? What happens if Iran's nuclear program survives in a degraded but not destroyed state? The conversation, drawing on analysis from nuclear policy experts, raised an argument that has been largely missing from mainstream coverage. Iran is a threshold state, a country with the technical capacity to produce a nuclear weapon, but that has chosen, thus far, not to cross the final line of production. That restraint has been a strategic choice. But the lesson being absorbed by Iranian decision-makers, and by every other country in the world watching this crisis, is a devastating one for global non-proliferation efforts. Libya abandoned its nuclear program in 2003 in exchange for normalized relations with the West. 8 years later, Muammar Gaddafi was killed during a NATO air campaign. Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in 1994 in exchange for security guarantees. Russia invaded in 2014 and again in 2022. And now Iran, a country that exercised restraint at the threshold level and was still bombed. The message to countries like North Korea, which has nuclear weapons, and to countries like Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and others that have watched this unfold, is chilling. If you want security, do not negotiate your weapons away. Build them to completion. Senior Iranian advisor Mehdi Mohammadi, appearing on state television, drew this conclusion explicitly. He said that if Iran does not have nuclear weapons, it is telling Washington, you can strike us when you want. The logic that follows from that, almost certainly, is that if the current regime survives a second American attack, it will accelerate its nuclear program rather than abandon it. It will go from being a threshold state to becoming a declared nuclear power as quickly as technologically possible. American military strikes on Iran's nuclear infrastructure may, paradoxically, be the single most effective way to guarantee that Iran eventually acquires the weapon those strikes are meant to prevent. That is the strategic paradox at the heart of this crisis, and it is why the stakes of the next 10 to 15 days are genuinely historic. The decision Trump makes, attack or deal, limited strike or extended campaign, regime decapitation or surgical nuclear suppression, will shape the Middle East and the global nuclear order for a generation. It will determine whether Iran emerges from this crisis as a weakened conventional power or as a nuclear-armed state. It will determine whether the Strait of Hormuz remains open for global oil trade or becomes a war zone. It will determine whether American allies in the region, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, Qatar, face years of Iranian retaliation or achieve a durable strategic outcome. And it will shape the precedent that every other threshold state in the world draws from watching the most powerful military on Earth decide whether force or diplomacy can resolve the most dangerous proliferation challenge of our time. As of this broadcast, Trump has said he expects to make a decision in the next 10 days to 2 weeks. The White House has confirmed that top national security officials met in the Situation Room this week to discuss the options. Trump was briefed personally by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner following the Geneva talks. One Trump advisor told Axios, "The boss is getting fed up." Some people around him warn against going to war with Iran, but I think there is a 90% chance we see kinetic action in the next few weeks. The Gerald R. Ford carrier, still heading to the region, has not yet taken its final position. Mark Cancian, the former Pentagon official, said plainly, "The countdown to any U.S. strikes will begin when the Gerald R. Ford moves into place." And in Tehran, Iranian financial markets are falling. The currency is weakening. Satellite images show construction equipment working through the night to harden nuclear facilities that have already survived one American bombing. The Revolutionary Guards are conducting exercises in the Strait of Hormuz. The Supreme Leader's succession is being planned. And in Geneva, the silence after inconclusive talks is louder than any declaration of war. There is one more detail that has received almost no attention in the coverage of this crisis, but which tells you something important about how seriously the Trump administration is taking the scale of what it may be planning. In a post on Truth Social, Trump stated that British air bases, specifically RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, England, and the joint American-British base at Diego Garcia in the British Indian Ocean Territory, would be used by the United States in an attack on Iran should Iran fail to agree to a nuclear deal. Diego Garcia is one of the most strategically significant military installations in the world, a remote atoll in the middle of the Indian Ocean from which B-2 stealth bombers have launched on long-range bombing missions in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Its inclusion in Trump's public statements about an Iran strike is not incidental. It reflects a targeting ambition that goes far beyond the 3 sites hit in June 2025. Fordow was the hardest target in June, and it took 12 of the most powerful conventional bombs in existence to damage it. If Iran has further hardened those sites, reaching them may require multiple bomb runs, multiple B-2 sorties, and sustained operational support from the most distant bases the United States operates. That is what the scale of this buildup actually reflects. It is not preparation for a pinprick. It is not preparation for a demonstration strike. According to current and former U.S. officials who spoke with the Washington Post this week, the Trump administration appears ready to launch what they described as an extended military assault on Iran. The word extended is doing a great deal of work in that formulation. An extended campaign means sustained bombing over days or weeks, targeting not just nuclear facilities, but potentially missile arsenals, air defense systems, naval assets, IRGC bases, and, if regime change is truly the objective, leadership infrastructure. It means B-2s flying from Diego Garcia. It means 2 carrier strike groups flying hundreds of sorties. It means cruise missiles from submarines. It means a campaign that, in scale and duration, would recall not the surgical strikes of Operation Midnight Hammer, but the sustained air campaigns of Desert Storm and the opening weeks of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Whether that campaign happens, whether it is limited or extended, whether it triggers a regional war or ends with a negotiated surrender, those are the questions that will be answered in the next 10 to 15 days. And we will be here every step of the way, bringing you the most accurate, the most comprehensive, and the most up-to-date coverage available anywhere.